Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Glow and Bodybuilding, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about shoulder training and about why, or at least a few reasons why, your shoulders might not be growing. Now, I've never had trouble growing shoulders just because, you know, we're all genetically predisposed for strengths and weaknesses in different areas. So shoulder training wasn't something that I struggled with a lot, right? Maybe, you know, a chest isolation was harder for me. Back isolation was harder for me in the beginning stages, but shoulders seemed to take over in everything, right? So that wasn't my major problem, but there were a few things that I saw people doing that were causing a lot of problems with their shoulder training. One of the things I found people did, especially during shoulder presses, because shoulder presses are the most popular shoulder exercise, right? That and side lateral raises. But during shoulder presses, I would see people not finding the ideal range of motion for their shoulder training. So what they would do is lower the weight when they're doing a dumbbell press or a barbell press all the way down, and then when they felt the tension changing from the muscle belly into the tendon, they would then come down that much lower and rest on the tendons and bounce. Now, I found that a lot of those people would develop chronic shoulder problems or bursitis or inflammation, but yet at the same time they'd say, oh, I just can't shoulder press, or I can't train chest now, or I can't do any sort of pressing movements. But a lot of the times they were irritating the joint most of the time with their training because they were just resting on the joints. So again, the strategic range of motion really does apply to avoiding injury as much as it does about having that ideal range of motion for muscle growth, right? They're both one and the same. Now, the mistake some people make is that they assume more range of motion means more results. And a lot of times the opposite is true when it comes down to injuries, right? If you have a range of motion that you're using that's getting you injured, it is definitely not going to get you more results. So yeah, the first mistake was people were coming down too low in the pressing movement and bouncing on the joint, causing inflammation in the shoulder, therefore not only keeping them from using the ideal amount of weight or heavier weight in some cases, but also they've been irritating the joints and not necessarily getting shoulder development, but more shoulder injuries, right? Now, the other thing is people feel the need to lock out at the top. Sometimes locking out at the top during a shoulder press will cause you to engage the neck, and therefore the neck starts to become more the weak link, or you start to strain your neck instead of really get those delts to be firing right to failure, right? Because you want to keep that constant tension on the delt. It's not about completing the movement just to make it look good from point A to point B. It's more about, do I fatigue this muscle or not? Does this muscle hit failure or not? That's more important when it comes down to building the shoulder. Now, if you want to do rehabilitative work and you want to lock that arm out at the top, and you know, you want to walk around with your arms above your head and all that kind of stuff to work the rotator cuff, that's fine, but that's a different purpose. You're doing those exercises for a different purpose than building big delts themselves. So you can do both, but do them on separate occasions and make sure that you do hit failure in those delts from time to time when you're doing shoulder presses by finding the ideal range of motion. And that's just as important on the lockout part, or the short of lockout part of the range of motion, as the bottom part of the range of motion, right? So you find that efficient way to keep that shoulder going, right? It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like, you know, bouncing on the bottom. Pretty simple, right? Now, the same applies for lateral raises. Some people, when they're doing lateral raises, they're raising the weight and then they feel the need to come up all the way to their head or whatever, and then they start to engage the neck or swing to get that neck involved. That's not necessary for most people. I mean, again, I'm always open to the fact that you have to go with where you're feeling the tension, but I've found a lot of times from here to here is where I feel the tension on the shoulders. But once I start coming up to here, I start to get a lot more neck involvement, bicep involvement, and all sorts of different stuff starts to happen, but it's not necessarily the delts hitting failure. So make sure you apply that strategic range of motion with all of your delt training, and don't necessarily just go from point A to point B, but feel, are you actually working your delts more, or are you bringing in other body parts in order to accomplish muscular failure or failure in that set? Now, the next thing I'll say, and this is a big one, this is like a huge one, is that people ignore the value of rear delt and external rotator cuff training. By working that rear delt and external rotator cuff, you definitely get that softball look in the shoulders. And the reason for this is because the rotator cuff wraps around the humerus, and when you grow that muscle, it starts to push the delt out, and at the same time make the joint integrity in the shoulder much stronger, so that way you're less likely to get an injury. So because of this, it is very imperative that you do rotator cuff training from time to time, whether it's laying on your side and doing external rotator cuff stuff, or you're doing bent over laterals with a little bit of external rotation. And at the same time, also make sure that you are aware of training your rear delts, because if you're training always front delts in the chest, what will happen is you start to round that upper back, and that will also cause more impingement and shoulder issues over the long run. So you want to balance everything out. You want to get the rear as strong as the front, the posterior as strong as the front. So by doing bent over lateral raises, by doing rear delt work, by doing rotator cuff work, you're going to not only make your shoulders safer, but you're going to make them bigger. They're going to actually get stronger and grow in size and get that softball look that most bodybuilders are looking for, right? But in the end, I mean, you want joint integrity, and doing this will make your joints stronger and less likely to get injured. So if you've been doing a lot of shoulder presses, you're pressing all the time, doing side lateral raises, and you're still not getting big shoulders, turn your attention towards the rear delts and the external rotator cuff muscles and see what happens. And I guarantee you, if you concentrate about 70% of your training on the rear delt and external rotator cuff, and then just do 30% or so on your front delt, you'll probably get more results. Because let's face it, you do a lot of front delt work when you are training chest. Now, I know some people, they say they can't get front delts when they're training chest and stuff, but most people are getting a lot of front delt work during chest training because it does go hand in hand with training chest, right? You do engage the front delts quite a bit. So I find, and I have found, that getting the rear delts and the rotator cuff involved really helped break through those hypertrophy plateaus when it came down to the shoulders looking more balanced and more rounded out. Now, the last thing I'm going to say that really gets in the way of people's shoulder training is injuries, of course. And one of the things people do is they do upright row work, and upright rows where they're internally rotating and pulling up the bar, right? So this may work for some people. Some people may get results from this, but if you're getting chronic inflammation in your shoulders, this is a sure sign that this is probably not the right movement for you, at least not with a barbell. Maybe with a cable where the tension is coming out from in front of you at an angle instead of straight up and down, but you don't want to impinge the shoulders or jam the joints in weird ways. And this is going to enable you to be able to train the shoulders harder, right? Because if you can't train shoulders hard, then you're not going to be able to get results. So yeah, just watch those internal rotated movements and also watch those front delt raises. Some people are built for them, and some people it works really well, but other people, it'll just inflame their delts. It'll just inflame their joints, inflame their bicep tendons. And I was one of those guys, like front delt raises don't work for me. They just jam the shoulders kind of weird and stuff. So you have to figure out what type of body you have, but if you're starting to find that certain exercises are not working with you or they're causing problems, then you have to discard them. Mountain. So yeah, I hope this helps out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching. And if you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalglambodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. I keep thinking this tree's gonna fall on me. It's like the wind is blowing it a bit and it's squeaking. Don't do that. If I tell the tree not to do it, then it won't do it. That's how it works. Mountain.